In this segment, I'd like to tell you about bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Let's start with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder includes depression, which we just talked about, but it also includes something called mania, which in some sense is the opposite of depression. Mania is when you are excessively happy all of the time. So bipolar disorder involves sort of a roller coaster effect where you're depressed some of the time and then manic some of the time and then depressed. Usually the mania lasts several days, maybe a week, it could be longer. But let me give you a sense of the symptoms of the different periods that people with bipolar disorder live through. So when they are experiencing a depressive episode, they have depression, they feel miserable, their sleeping is affected, their appetite is affected, they feel exhausted, they withdraw from the world, their thought is slowed, sometimes even speak slowly. Everything slows down. Mania is the opposite. Everything speeds up. The person is running around doing all sorts of things. They have creative ideas all the time. They can't stop the ideas from coming. They're hyperactive. They want to put their ideas into action, and yet they can't quite organize them. They're happy, 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 and everything is great. And if I can just get this idea developed, we'll all be millionaires in a month. Wow! That's the mania associated with bipolar disorder. The graph that you see here with the sort of roller coaster outline gives you a little bit of a sense of it. So for a lot of times, people with bipolar disorder have their symptoms are under control. But then something happens and they might be triggered into a depressive period, or they might be triggered into a manic period. It's not always equally balanced. Some people experience more mania than depression. Other people experience more depression than mania, but there is the cycling between the two. Interestingly, bipolar disorder is associated with intelligence. Some of the most creative artists that we know are or have been people with bipolar disorder symptoms. There's something about the bipolar brain that is associated with creativity and intelligence. I want to show you lastly some brain images from the same person when that person was experiencing depression versus mania. On the far left and the far right, you see two slices of a brain. The picture has been taken from above, so you see the slice this way. And you can see that they're very cool colors, blues and greens. That means low brain activity. And that's what people with bipolar disorder have going on in their brain when they're under a depressive state. When they're experiencing mania, notice the picture in the middle, that's their brain during mania. You can see that the brain is active all over the place, highly active. Next, let's talk about schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia is a very serious mental illness that involves a disconnect of some type between what you perceive and reality. It involves disorganized thoughts, delusions, and hallucinations. We'll talk about both of them, and strange behaviors. It's a thought disorder. The thinking can become irrational and disorganized. Delusions are thoughts that don't connect with reality, and hallucination is when you see or hear or taste or smell things that are not there. It's like any mental illness, an enormous amount of variability within the category of schizophrenia. Not every person with schizophrenia experiences all of these symptoms, not by a long shot. Some of the most intelligent people I know and work with on a daily basis have schizophrenia. They manage it through their doctors with medication and therapy. But sometimes they might experience, say, for example, delusions, which are false beliefs. Someone struggling with schizophrenia might feel that they are God. Some people think that they're Muhammad or Jesus Christ or the Buddha. They might believe that random things that happen are actually messages from their God talking to them. They might believe that they can control other people's minds or that other people can control their minds. They might believe that the government is out to get them and the government isn't. Hallucinations are false perceptions when you perceive something that isn't there. Hallucinations can be auditory. You might hear a noise or a voice talking to you. They might be visual. You could see religious people, dead people, people attacking you. You could smell things that aren't there. You could taste things that aren't there. You could feel things that aren't there. Maybe you feel bugs all over your body. Now that break from reality, when you perceive or think about things in a way that isn't consistent with what other people would tell you reality is, that's called psychosis. And there are gender differences and there are age differences and seasonal differences. It's quite interesting. So most men who develop schizophrenic symptoms have their first symptoms when they are in college, high school. For women, it's a little later typically. We know that there's a genetic component to schizophrenia. Being the child of someone with schizophrenia doesn't mean that you will get schizophrenia, but it does increase your odds. If you have an identical twin, and remember the difference between fraternal and identical twins. So fraternal twins are related like regular siblings. Identical twins are clones. They are genetically identical. If your identical twin has schizophrenia, then there's a 50% chance that you will have schizophrenia as well. Note it's not 100, so we know it's not all genetic, but there is a genetic component. If your sibling had schizophrenia, there's a little less than a 10% chance that you will get schizophrenia. Now remember that I talked about very briefly at the beginning that models of mental illness say that you need maybe two things now. One is the genetic predisposition or the genetic tendency, but the second thing is some kind of stressor. And I'm going to show you how subtle, what a small little change can determine whether someone develops schizophrenia or not. It turns out that most people with schizophrenia are born between January and May. That's odd. January and May, why? Well, if when your mother was in her second trimester in the fall, and remember fall is flu season, if your mother is in the second trimester and she gets the flu at that time, that can be a sufficient enough trigger or stressor on your system that it triggers schizophrenia. That's called the winter birth effect. Interesting, right? As far as scientists know right now, it takes at least two things to get a mental illness. One would be the genetic predisposition, but that's not enough. Some sort of environmental stressor or challenge. Could just be something as simple as mom got the flu at a bad time. Researchers think that schizophrenia is associated with the neurotransmitter dopamine. Typically, the treatment for schizophrenia involves reducing the level of dopamine in a person's system. And that's it.